Hey everyone, welcome back to the next segment of the First Gen Psychologist. I'm Dr. Lisette, aka the First Gen Psychologist. I'm a first gen Latina psychologist, leadership coach, writer, speaker, and today I am your host. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I will be speaking with an amazing person today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her. But before that, let me just remind you the purpose of this series. So the purpose of this series is to cover topics that destigmatize mental health, as well as topics for personal development and empowerment centered on the first gen experience. And today's topic is Unleashing Your Inner Magic, a journey of self-discovery and valuing your being. And our expert that will be with us today is Doctora Laura Minero, who is an anti-racist and LGBTQ plus affirming licensed psychologist, community healing consultant, and speaker and owner of Yolo Libre Therapy Training and Consulting. I'm going to share a little bit more about her, but also, we all wear very many different hats. So if you can't see, I was like, we'll switch them out. So Doctora Laura Minero, her pronouns are she, her, ella, is a licensed psychologist, and she specializes in working with BIPOC, two-spirit, queer, trans, plus Spanish-speaking and undocumented immigrant youth and adults via her independent practice, Yolo Libre Therapy, Training and Consulting. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has dedicated her life affirming work to revolutionizing systems that adversely impact undocumented, queer, trans, and communities of color. Doctora Minero has received several state and national service awards from the National Latinx Psychological Association and the American Psychological Association's Division for Counseling Psychology and the Society for the Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race. And I'm sure there's more ands to that because you all just get a very brief snippet of the amazing guests that I have on. And so, Doctora Laura Minero, thank you for being here. Welcome. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited. I know you and I have talked about having this conversation for a while. So just thank you so much, Doctora Lisette, for having me and for what you're doing. I just love seeing the articles you've been putting out too and sharing really important knowledge with our community, with first gen folks like ourselves. So just thank you first and foremost for everything that you're doing and for having me.
Yeah, yeah, and so, I always like to get straight into it because I know we have such a brief amount of time together, and so let's just start with our first question, which is, how can we identify our own inner magic?
Well, there's so
Or
much complexities to that, right?
yeah.
It's so complex, but I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is that, especially as first gen folks,
Mhm.
right? Being people of color, also, if you have other identities that are commonly oppressed and marginalized, I think we do get a lot of messages, right? That
Mhm.
there's a lot that's wrong with us, that there's a lot that's not okay with us or that's abnormal or whatnot, right? Essentially, we're pathologized.
Mhm.
And so it can be really difficult, right? I know even in my own work, that's what I've examined, right? How have policies negatively impacted our community? And I think that's often, very often, we forget that we have enormous gifts, right? And it's often what people try to shut out the most in you that
Mhm.
ends up being your biggest glow up, quote unquote, right? There's a reason why. There's a reason why people are trying to shut that part of you
Mhm.
out or down or turn that light off, right? Because not all can handle that light. And so I think it's interesting for me to look back on my journey. One of the biggest things that I was teased for are the things that I get to do now, right? So the biggest things that I feel like I wasn't accepted for or wasn't seen for, wasn't understood for, like being queer, right? Being a person of color, all these intersectionalities, that's like all I get to do now. And I
Mhm.
feel like I understand it in this intimate way and understand it as being part of my inner magic. And now I get to help other people understand how to see the magic in
Yeah.
that, right? So
Mhm.
I think if you can go back and see the parts of yourself that need the most love,
Mhm.
that tends to be where our inner magic truly lies.
Yeah. I really love the way you framed your answer to that, especially because it kind of really goes into this next question, which are the common obstacles people experience. Because I think it sounds like we're both similar in our work, have a very systemic approach. And I think that's a lot of the field of counseling psychologists and understanding that what is happening for us is a reaction to an environmental or systemic, usually oppressive influence, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's we are taught that that means that there is something wrong with us, and it's so hard to challenge that. And I remember learning about this from Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of understanding that oppressed mindset. But again, that's a whole other conversation I think we can delve into very deeply, so I won't go too far into that. But for those of you who are interested, I highly recommend taking time to read that book, or watching maybe some short YouTube videos that can like help you understand that concept more, of how
Mm-hmm.
important having that critical consciousness, having that awareness. And that is a big part of my therapy practice, and imagine also probably for you, doctora.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
and so we know some of the common obstacles are, the systemic factors, right? Like whether it's like the access that you may have to certain resources because of the neighborhoods you live in. But I'll turn it over to you, doctora. What are some other common obstacles that you've noticed in the folks you've worked with?
Yeah, it's definitely systemic, right? But we know also that relationships
Mm-hmm.
reinforce the systemic. So while it can be very macro, right?
Yeah.
Like policies or even like a church you attend, right? Or a school you attend,
Yeah.
there are individuals within that are also receiving that same information, right? So unfortunately, they also become folks who then spew that same narrative. So I know for me, when I look back, and I'm not saying that's all I've received, right? Because I'm obviously here, I've received a lot of support, but looking back on my own journey, often where I got those messages were the people that were delivering it, right? And so they lived within these institutions, but they were still very close to me. And so this can at times even be family. And we need to be able to acknowledge that, right? But understand, I think one thing that helped me understand was that that narrative was still coming from the systemic. And eventually, right, I had the privilege to break from that. But it also can come from the people that you're surrounded by. And if these are the narratives that
Yeah.
everyone around you is spewing, it can become super, super difficult.
Exactly, right? That's where we begin to then again question ourselves. I think differently than others. Does that mean that there's something wrong with me? I think
Mhm.
that's what we try to challenge, right? Because that's where that limiting belief comes in, right? And that's what this whole conversation really is about. It's how do we begin to gain awareness around some of these limiting beliefs that we've internalized, to
Mhm.
recognize that we can overcome these. We can like shift into a space where we're entering more of our magic, right? And glowing and shining as bright as possible. And I'll share this very briefly, but I had a guest, I think it's actually last week, and she said something that I thought was really powerful. She's like, ya no más ni de aquí ni de allá. Yo estoy aquí y aquí voy a brillar. And I love
Oh.
that so much. I think it also like resonates so deeply with sort of what we are talking about today. And her name is Claudia
Yes.
Melo.
Oh, yes.
And so she's just a segment before this. So if that resonates with you all, please go to my YouTube live stream to go watch that. But yeah, so coming back, but yes, inner magic. So how can we learn to value ourselves and our inner magic more fully?
It's so wild because I feel like all of us who, do this
Mhm.
work, we speak similar language
Mhm.
because for me, that translates to blossom where you're planted, which
Yeah.
was a beautiful quote that I had heard when I first attended community college. And that kind of stuck with me. And that was probably one of the most difficult times because I learned that I couldn't go to a four-year institution, I couldn't get financial aid as an undocumented student. So there's a lot of exclusion that people face being undocumented. And one of the things that helped me value myself was actually realizing the power of that quote and
Mm.
understanding, wow, okay, this is where I'm planted right now. These are my current circumstances,
Mhm.
and I can blossom here. I don't need to now be my own oppressor. Oftentimes when I work with undocumented folks, I help them also understand we don't need to be our own border agents. We
Mhm.
don't need to be our own border patrols, right?
Mhm.
And oppress ourselves and
Yeah.
constantly spew that narrative now to
Yeah.
ourselves, right? What we call internalized oppression.
Mhm.
So part of it is finding the places where we are deeply hurt and having self-compassion and pouring that love
Yeah.
into ourselves. And sometimes we might need a little bit of help, right? One of the things that I mentioned that could be an obstacle can also become a way that you help yourself, like
Mhm.
surrounding yourself with people that do see your light, maybe even before we do, right?
Mhm.
So that can be really, really powerful, is to surround yourself with people that
Yeah.
um, are kind of fanning your flames, even though you don't realize that the flames are there, right?
Yes, yes. I love that you say that because those there are people who see your light, and the way you framed it, like even I think back to my personal journey, a lot of the challenges that I've experienced, like I can show up here and feel more comfortable in this space, but I'm a very shy person and grew up being very, very shy, and certain spaces I can take up more space and feel comfortable. But I will tell you that when I entered academia, I had never felt so small. I never felt so small.
Mm,
But there were people who I encountered who were allies, who saw that and who worked to push me out of my comfort zone in their small ways. Like, I think you should try this. Let me nominate you for this. Let me try this. And I would try, and I was terrified, right? But it was, if it weren't for these folks and people who I still think of and care for very deeply, they help me take those small baby steps
mhm.
towards the light to then be able to feel more confident in my capacity to do it on my own,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
that community to overcome those limiting beliefs, it's also just recognizing there are some people around you who really do want to see you shine as bright as you can, right? Shine as bright as you can. And
Yes.
they will, plant small seeds. They will do small things because yes, you're not going to be all the way there. You're not going to be shining super bright when you start. We all start somewhere, but it's so beautiful. And so
Yeah.
with that, I think this really goes into my next one, which is what role does self-compassion play in this journey of self-discovery?
It's huge. It's enormous. I got chills just hearing your story, doctora, and I could totally like see you in that place. And we do need that watering, right? So I really see ourselves as plants. So sometimes, right, in the pot, we might realize we see some like browning of our leaves, right? And what do we think, right? Oh, am I doing too much of this or am I doing too much of that? Do I need to switch over a pot completely if
Yeah.
I'm growing too much?
Mhm.
Right? There's no such thing as
Mhm.
too much, but if I'm growing a lot, do I need another environment? So I just kind of apply that to
Mhm.
ourselves and think of the ways that we need to consistently be tending to our nurturing. I flinched at the beginning when you said expert on this because, yes, although I get to help guide other people, be a part of their journeys, I see this process of self-compassion and
Mhm.
self-discovery as como un caracol, like this
Yeah.
little spiral. And there can still be difficult moments,
Oh,
right? There
yeah.
could still be moments where you go back to this place of questioning yourself, but don't tell yourself that you've gone back to
Mhm.
place number one, right? Or spot number one,
Yeah.
or right back to where you began. You're just going through a process. There's going to
Yeah.
be different triggers, but
Yeah.
it's so important that when those triggers come up, to have some kind of mantra, to have some kind of
Mhm.
affirmation of gentleness, right?
Yeah.
This is just part of the process. I'm exactly
Mhm.
where I need to be,
Yes.
and I will figure this out. I will be okay. And to not be self-defeating in that process, because that's where we again, right, then become our own oppressor. But we have the power to actively resist that. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what our ancestors have wanted for us, right?
Yes.
We have the beautiful opportunity with all these tools, all this knowledge that's being shared, right? All this knowledge that we're creating to
Mm-hmm.
actively resist that. And sometimes if you do struggle with that, I always suggest, I know I had to do this on my own journey. I realized it was so much easier for me to say something to my best friend. Like if my
Mm-hmm.
best friend was going through something, and then I couldn't say it to myself, right? So one thing that was helpful was having my best friend, but if I couldn't call my best friend, I would literally be like, "Okay, Laura, what would you say to your best friend right now? Now you need to say that to yourself." Right? So I think just cultivating this culture of deep love for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves is really critical in this process.
Yes, I again love the way you're framing that is deep love for ourselves, right? And if we think about it that way, because I think I hear the term, just have some compassion, be self-compassionate, like do that, and to someone who doesn't understand, if that's not something you were raised with, or that's not maybe something that feels natural or comfortable for you, you're just speaking in a foreign language. Like, what do you mean? It's like when you're first telling people, like, just go to therapy. It's like, well, what is that? I don't actually know what that is. Do I trust this person? Can I feel safe with them? What can I tell them? Right. And so it's self-compassion, but when you think about it more as deep love, right? I think I think instinctually, we all have the capacity to love, right?
Mhm.
Uh, some maybe feel that more easily than others. But if you think about that love, it's how can you love yourself just a little bit more every day? And in that moment is being kind to myself when I've made a mistake, or when I feel that I've made a mistake, right? And that
Mhm. Mhm.
we're learning, we're growing. I know that when I say expert, and I appreciate that you shared that in the space, because I've actually received that feedback from some of my guests. And I'm like, no, that I think of when I think of someone as an expert, I don't think that means, oh, they don't need to ever learn anything else again. But there's someone who has dedicated a large portion of their life to really delving into
Mhm.
like a very specific area and imparting that knowledge upon others. And it's an ongoing experience.
Mhm.
You don't get, I mean, you can't just stop whenever you want to, but you're always learning. There's always something more, and times are always changing. And so it can be uncomfortable, but you have dedicated so many years of your life to this work. Definitely more than 10. I would like to say. I don't know the number. I won't say this, but I don't know the
Thank
specific
you.
number. But I know for me,
You
it's way
see
more.
the pouring in, you're literally like an example of what we're talking about right now. It's
Mhm.
happening, this exchange, right, of affirming one another,
Yes,
in what it is that we do and
exactly.
who we are.
Yeah. And so, consejos for first gens who may feel stuck or lost in the journey of self-discovery. Okay, if you all have not heard that we are big advocates. And I say we because I feel like this is a we thing for community support, for community who wants to see you thrive, support the people who want to support you, the people who are there. And we all know, I like to think that everyone has that one person. Maybe it's not even someone you feel super close to, but someone who will just randomly check in on you. If you're on social media, it's that person who always reshares your posts. It's that person who, like, who you feel seen by, and even in a small way. That's a way of that for me is so special, that community, right? Like connecting with that, finding
Yes.
that. But what other consejos do you have, Doctora?
Yeah, and I love that that was what you highlighted, because that's kind of what the whole conversation has been about.
Mhm.
Healing happens in community, and
Yes.
healing happens in relationship. And that, for me personally, is at the core of healing, right? So I feel like those are big things, right? Think of who you surround yourself by. I always say this when I'm mentoring or speaking with students in particular, because we get a lot of, like you said, right? You felt so small in academia. I say, for every no that you have in your life, which unfortunately we might get a lot of those, right? Surround yourself with 20 people. I mean it, 20 people
Mhm.
who will say yes. Or a hardcore one like my mom, who I know I can just call, right? And will always just have the right message. So definitely that's one of my biggest advices as well. And you mentioned something earlier, that there are some folks who may particularly struggle in embracing this because it feels so foreign to you, right? I have encountered people often who say, "Oh, isn't that selfish? Like, I feel bad doing that, or I feel guilt, I feel shame," right? And so one of my biggest advice for folks who that's very common, right, in our culture to experience that because we come from such a collectivistic culture. That doesn't mean leave that behind, but also create room for yourself, right? Take up space. Sometimes you need to do it or say it even before you believe it. So just try taking small steps, right? Even if it's, I'm going to say an affirmation for myself, right? It's okay for me to take up space. So you might be saying to me, Laura, I don't believe that though, right?
Yeah.
Right. But our brains are really, really powerful, right? We can learn to rewire our brains just by speaking to ourselves and speaking out loud differently. And then our bodies catch up, and then we start to embrace that mentality. So that would be one of my biggest consejos for how we can kind of get ourselves unstuck. And if you do both of those things, or all three of these things, right? Community, your close relationships, and you're consistently giving yourself these positive messages, reading books, right, that support with this. I'll put in a plug-in for the Miguel Ruiz series that I have right here. These books changed my life. The Four Agreements. This book is life-changing. So what you surround yourself with too, what you ingest.
But I was like, we've got the voice of knowledge, the Four Agreements, and the mastery of love. And so I'm with you. I love all of these. And so and I recommend them to all of my clients because I'm just like, honestly, when it comes to mental health, a lot of the terms you hear, cognitive restructuring, all of this, I'm just like, it's all the same. It's all the same. They're all agreements. Let's talk about it in a way that's more accessible and easier for everyone to understand. But that message being, I think, sorry, I want to summarize, but I want to say this again. I think those 3 points were just blossom where you're planted. Find the community around you. Find, who can help you get that extra sunlight that you need to, like, when you've had an extra damp day, and having that kindness extended to yourself in the more difficult moments. If you're just like, today is just not the day. Today is just not the day. And that goes back to me. That's part of the Four Agreements. You just always do your best, whatever your best is that day. And so, yeah, I feel that so strong. And I saw some comments. Yeah, have those books. They're great books. Big plug for those books. And so okay. I recognize that we're at time, so I want to just end, and we went gotten a little bit over, but just how can we support you in your work, doctora?
Yes, well, thank you for listening. This is already big, but please follow me if you can. I'm on Instagram, like most of us are now, right? I think you saw that down earlier. I do have my own practice, so if you know anyone that would like to attend therapy, I'm available, and also do a lot of speaking and training. So if there's anything that resonated, I love meeting folks, love to come to people's schools, organizations, love to connect with folks. So in general, if you want to connect too, I just love building community and meeting like-minded folks as well.
Awesome. So please, if you're not already following Doctora Laura Minero, please go follow her. I've got her handles up here, her website there, speaking engagements and all of that. And so if for whatever reason you can't contact her, reach out to me and I'll connect you to, let's make sure that we can connect. If some email bounces back, we can all check in and look out for one another. But that said, thank you all for joining us. For those of you who joined live, I appreciate you and your energy. Thank you for those of you who engaged in the comments. That was really nice. I don't know if you have access to them, Doctora, but Katie Flores.
I didn't get to see them, but I'll take a look.
Surround yourself with people that fan your fire, which is just another way of what we've been talking about. And so I love that. And so thank you again. Please share this segment with anyone who you think may benefit. Subscribe to the YouTube channel to not miss out on other amazing conversations with wonderful guests. And I am planning on, as long as I can, new episodes will air every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.